Hey guys, good to have Geoff Scott and Dave Wascom from ASUG, the Americas SAP User Group. Geoff is CEO and Dave is EVP of Executive Programs. It's going to be fun discussing all the acrobatics in SAP world and in events world and so on. Dave, come on board, introduce yourself, and then Geoff, tell us a little bit about ASUG too.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Vinnie. I'm David Wascom. I'm the Senior Vice President of Executive Programs at ASUG. I have been with ASUG as an employee for a little less than a year now, but a long-time volunteer. I actually served on ASUG's Board of Directors for a number of years. Prior to coming to ASUG, I was the CIO for Summit Electric Supply, an electrical hard goods distributor based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I was part of the team that got us live on SAP ECC back in 2007, and so I managed that organization for a number of years and had an opportunity to come to ASUG, and here I am managing our executive programs.
Geoff?
Vinnie, good afternoon. Hello. Geoff Scott, I'm the CEO of ASUG. I've been the CEO of ASUG for about 6 years now. Prior to that, I was a CIO out in California at Tom's Shoes. Prior to that, I was a CIO at JBS, a big protein manufacturer or harvester, and then a big stint for over 10 years in automotive. So I've been around the technology landscape for a long time, Vinnie. As you well know, you and I go way back.
Tell us a little bit, tell the audience a little bit about ASUG. You know, the scope, geography, the scope of your services and so on.
So, Vinnie, ASUG is the Americas SAP User Group. We are here to help organizations and individuals get the most value from their investment in SAP technology. We all know that SAP is a major powerhouse when it comes to enterprise resource planning, as well as a lot of other really important enterprise technologies. And our job at ASUG, and we've been doing it for 30 years, is quite simply to help people succeed with the software. And we work very closely with SAP at all levels of the organization, from the very, very top down to the folks working on the products and services that are important to the customer base. A lot of customer outreach and a tremendous amount of integration and working along with the partner community to make sure that all these solutions come together and add value. And David has been an amazing part of this as well. So David, what did I miss?
That's it. To your point, it's about helping customers make the most of their investment, right? And so whether it is working with practitioners, understanding how to configure or how to manage the solution, up through executives, helping them understand what's on the horizon, what should they be concerned with, and how do they make decisions around those business challenges.
And Vinnie, to your question, it's thousands of member companies and well over 130,000 individual members. So it's a massive community.
Wow. Geoff and Dave both. We've seen some amazing heroics in the last 3 months. In all the doom and gloom, all the healthcare heroics, auto companies jumping in to make ventilators, banks processing 4 million PPP loans, all kinds of last mile logistics. You guys watch so many SAP customers. What have you seen that has made you go, wow, I didn't think that was doable?
Geoff, why don't you go first on that one?
Vinnie, to your point, right, we have a 12-member, board of directors at ASUG who are all C-level and mostly CIOs. And we've been doing a lot of, like you would expect, virtual events. So I've had a great opportunity to interview a lot of CEOs, CXOs over the past, 12 weeks or so. And what really stands out to me is an unending sense of optimism in the middle of tectonic disruption, right? So one of the things that has really resonated with me is how much work and how much ground all of these C-level executives and their teams have covered in an incredibly short period of time, and how they really feel very positive about it. I mean, and each organization is experiencing a tremendous amount of unrest. They have financial challenges, they have supply chain challenges, but they're figuring out a way to get through that. I was talking to a chief procurement officer at one of the big auto manufacturers, and to hear their story about two things. One, an unprecedented stopping of global automotive production. Never been done in the history of the company, but because of COVID, they stopped every single plant globally. And then how do you go about restarting that? And these plants were not stopped in a coordinated, planned way. And some of them, they were shut down in a matter of days. So you might have vehicles in various states of manufacture, of assembly on the line that you have to restart. And then the things that they did with their enterprise software to bring in tents, to bring in PPE, to do all these things that they never would have imagined 6 months earlier was a really amazing story. I mean, one of a litany that we have. David.
I'd say there's really been a couple of things that have jumped out at me. To your point, Geoff, that, you know, in the many conversations I've had the pleasure to have with C-level executives around North America over the last couple of months, there's an overwhelming sense of optimism. You know, it's grounded in reality, right? People are not being delusional around where we are today. But tremendous optimism, tremendous resilience. You know, willingness to, you know, look, I've got to get jobs done, and organizations are stepping up and making it happen. So whether it's, you know, a manufacturer that's been designated as an essential business, but most of their supply chain has not been, how do they respond to that? You know, the fact that they're allowed to be open, but nobody can send them parts or nobody can pick up their products, they have to manage that. Yeah. Another thing that I've really been excited by is a tremendous sense of hope. One of the manufacturers that I spoke with early on, they had, you know, as everyone did, they closed down all of their back office, moved everybody to a tremendous work from home effort. But they still had their manufacturing, their plant floor employees are still in place. Their work from home staff, their back office, actually put together care packages to bring to all of the folks that were still at the office, if you will, at the plant, to show their support for the organization. It was a tremendous effort and a tremendous team focus.
You know,
we could probably take this whole half hour, Vinnie, and just, you know, bat back and forth the different stories. I want to add one more if I can. Can I add one more?
Yeah, please.
You know, I talked to one of the chief operating officer of one of the, you know, drug manufacturers who was rushing to market with a COVID, you know, potentially a COVID cure. And one of the things that was unbelievable about this conversation is they are a relatively young startup. They have never moved as quickly as they're moving and had to amass the potential amount of vaccine that they will need to fuel the world. So all of this for them is brand new territory. And, you know, the way that they're running through systems, the way that they're thinking about their enterprise applications, the way that they are trying to architect all of this. And it's all built on the hope that their solution to COVID works. They have no proof of that. But because of the demand, they have to literally go in with all that risk and get this done, and it may not pay off. And that, I think, is another tremendous example. And I apologize. You have other questions.
Geoff and Dave, both of you, I mean, it's so good to hear you optimistic, right? I've done about 50 of these calls, and every one of them I end up going, wow, it's so good to see these executives stressed out, but just so focused, right? And then I come to social media, and people are just so snarky, and it's such a contrast. And not, you know, I always turn around and tell social media, like, guys, you're making it difficult for business people. It's tough enough for them. Let's not scare consumers. Let's not scare citizens. Let's be factual. Anyways, let me ask you about, you know, clearly as a CIO, you know, recessions tend to be very tough on CIOs. People expect a lot of cost savings. In this pandemic, people are also looking at new revenue opportunities, right? Because some ones have died, new ones have opened up, as in the example you gave, just like that, right? So given the two pressures, the cost pressures and the new revenue pressures, how do you think CIOs are doing? And more importantly, how is SAP helping them given these new pressures?
David, you want to lead off?
Yeah, I can lead off if you like. Yeah, I'm seeing one of the nice things that's coming out of this is that the business challenges are not as a direct result of some structural issue within the economy. And so what happens is you end up seeing a ton of different new normals, right? Some industries are going through relative boom times right now. Yep. Some are very, very much struggling. And, you know, it depends on, you know, where you happen to live on that continuum. And so I'm seeing and having conversations with CIOs that are going through exactly that, right? You know, I've got to pull money out of the budget. I can't execute projects now. But I'm seeing at least as many CIOs that are having the conversation of, I can't effectively staff and execute all the work I'm being asked to do now.
Yeah.
And so it's creating a very challenging time for, how do I find resources? How do I appropriately manage requirements? My priorities have changed significantly. And so, how do I move forward with things that maybe weren't as important to me 6 months ago? Topics like RPA, that's front of mind for a lot of companies where that was maybe just something in the background for them, right?
Well, more specifically, we're seeing huge demand for things like telemedicine, distance learning, right? PPP loans were hard for a while where small businesses were getting those loans.
Yeah, collaboration tools, Zoom, like this, right?
Right. Last mile logistics, drive-through mobile technologies. These are new applications that most companies hadn't thought about, right? So given those scenarios, how is SAP coming and helping them? Or are they going somewhere else for those applications?
So, Vinnie, back to your first question, a lot to unpack in where your thoughts are. And I think that this is a combination of a technology-fueled pandemic and a technology-fueled recovery and a recession, or maybe it's a depression, we don't know, right? And what I mean by that is imagine where we would be if this had happened 5 years ago or 7 years ago, right? The amount of technology has gotten us through this pandemic. These tools we're talking about, Zoom, Teams, work from home, all the technology stack. So the good news, if you're an SAP customer, and what I've heard from most CIOs who run large SAP installations, is their problem in moving everyone remote has not been SAP. Yes. In fact, they've been relatively well prepared. They've largely said, my SAP stack was not a concern of mine when we had to move to remote work. What was a concern of theirs were all the other apps sitting in their portfolio that had not had the benefit of being moved to cloud infrastructure, or were sitting behind corporate data centers, or were old enough that you had to have specially equipped PCs to operate them. That was where most CIOs had substantial problems, or having to get a whole bunch of people and employees that usually were occupying and using technology like older style desktop computers that were, that you couldn't take up and move home. A lot of them were equipping people for homework. We're doing a lot of those things. So initially, the SAP footprint, in my view, was not a substantial problem. However, Vinnie, talk about supply chain. Talk about some other things. And when you talk about those, right, this is where I think SAP has to come back in, because I think what we see is as it stood, the SAP footprint works, but it's not going to work the way you need it to work in a pandemic economy where you have to make lightning decisions. So, to your point earlier, a lot of companies are making products they never thought they'd make before. Ford Motor Company making ventilators. Hunter Douglas making PPE because their market for window blinds isn't as strong as it was prior to the pandemic. So how do you use a tool like SAP to keep up with those those rapidly changing product specs, plant floor requirements, shipping and distribution requirements? And that's really where some of the challenges have been in just personnel and process adoption to make sure that the technology keeps up with the speed of the business.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with Peter Meyer today, and I said, you really need to start talking more about what I call edge applications, because that's where CIOs do have money. They're in healthcare. They do have money for telemedicine. They're in, banking. They had to have PPP and stuff like that. So there's a lot of those COVID-driven new applications that the SAP needs to become a little more agile about.
Vinnie, just to amplify that a little bit, that's one of the things that I've really heard loud and strong from everyone I've spoken to, is that there are a lot of programs, and SAP, credit to them, they're bringing forward a lot of services, a lot of capabilities to help people. But one of the challenges is that SAP has to make that big jump that everyone else is making. SAP has had the luxury to live in kind of a long-term planning cycle for many years, right? And suddenly they have to become extremely agile. I as a CIO can't allow you to spend time talking to me about, I've got a great change I can make for your technology stack, and it's going to take us a year to figure it out. Don't have a year.
Yeah.
And those those big projects, David, to your point, those big projects that maybe didn't start, Vinnie, before the pandemic are probably likely to lag a little bit, right? For everything that we've been doing, all the research we've been doing at ASUG, most of the projects that were in flight prior to the pandemic have moved and continued to move. We have another number of examples of customers who finished off projects, under adverse circumstances, but got them done. But those ones that maybe said, you know what, I need another couple months pre-pandemic, I'm going to plan this for the second quarter. I'm going to plan this for the third or fourth quarter. We're seeing that those projects are getting pushed back a little bit, right? Which makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Let's switch gears a little bit. Dave, clearly your events business, no physical meetings, right?
Right.
Tell us about how your world has been turned upside down. I know you've been doing a lot of wonderful experimentation with On24 and a whole bunch of other new technologies. Tell us about that world.
Absolutely, and you're right. It's a whole new world for us, right? It's been out there, but it's again like what a lot of the challenges our customers are facing. It's changing our priority. We have to become adept at virtual engagement now because that's what's available to us. And so, one of the nice things that I've found and that has really been prevalent in the virtual space is that there's a pretty high level of tolerance for some rough edges around the experience. People understand. Look, you're doing this from your house, right? You're not sitting in a recording studio at a global TV network managing this every day, right? There's going to be challenges.
It sounds like Geoff is, but
some of us are finding that there's a television network in our basements, Vinnie, which I don't think is exactly the most optimum place for it, but it's what has to happen.
But I've been on a number of calls with Geoff where it's me and Geoff and his cat.
Yeah.
Or me and Geoff and my dog, right? Where that's part of the new normal, or as one of the pundits recently said, that's part of the new abnormal. But that allows us to kind of humanize the experience, right? That's really the ultimate challenge we have with the virtual space, is because I don't get that physical intimacy, I don't get that social interaction that I'm used to in a face-to-face event. How do I make it more engaging? How do I make it compelling? And that's really the ultimate focus for us, because there are so many challenges, or so many channels right now to get content. Really, the differentiator is what's the experience around the content.
Are you finding video fatigue? Are you competing with a lot of other distractions, gaming?
I would say I would say in two ways, right? One is it's emotionally draining at some level. Everybody has experienced this, right? After a long day of sitting on video conference calls with your team or with clients or with your providers, it's an exhausting day. You get to the end of the day and it's very difficult. And it's because all the conversations are all these kind of scheduled, very purposeful conversations. You don't get to have that stream of consciousness, water cooler type interaction with people now, right? That for most of us is very energizing to be able to have that conversation, to step away from the structured engagement. And so that part is really the piece that's missing, in my opinion, from the virtual world, right? So at the end of the day, you step back and you're like, holy cow, that was a very long day.
So I might add two things we're seeing from an ASUG perspective as well, Vinnie. Two things. One, what I'm going to call the inversion effect, and the second I'm going to call the second screen effect. So when it comes to all of the virtual program that we've been doing, and we have become in a very short period of time at ASUG really good at doing virtual events. And we've been, prior to COVID, we relied very heavily on face-to-face events. That was a big part of what we did. And we've learned over the last 6 months, for obvious reasons, that that virtual events are going to be the way that we will survive this pandemic. So what do I mean by inversion effect? So what we know is when we hold large-scale SAP events, the people that attend those are the ones who have travel budget, which tend to be the directors, the CIOs, the senior leaders, the analysts. So we don't see the lower level, developers, typically attend the events because they don't get the travel budget. So now that we're in the middle of the pandemic, we see this inversion effect occur. And what I mean by that is those are the folks that we're seeing come to our events. So we're getting to see brand new audiences that we haven't seen for some time. We've seen them in chapter meetings. We haven't seen them at some of the other events that we do. So they're now coming to these events that we're doing virtually And those higher level people in the technology organizations or in the business organizations, those folks we don't see as well, or how we see them is through much more curated special events. And then the second thing I would tell you is all of us and many of us are now consuming this content on second screens. So what we're seeing is, I'm continuing to do my office job, responding to email, working on configuration, doing the job I need to do on my primary screen, and then potentially on my tablet or a secondary screen, I might have a virtual event up and running. So I'm largely sitting there doing this and focused on my work. You say something interesting to me. You say something that goes, oh, wow, that's interesting. I'm going to look over, go, let me listen to that for a few minutes. And then as that conversation dwindles or it gets less interesting, I'm going to move back. And that's, I think, where we as ASUG, and we had a long conversation about that today amongst our team members, where we need to do a better job programming, where we have an opportunity, is to recognize that second screen effect and how do we take advantage of it.
It's also more exhausting. Yeah.
100%.
Geoff, let's go back to the comment you made about projects getting postponed. If they hadn't started, getting postponed. I'm hearing from at least some companies, partly because the hyperscalers have been approaching them with this, which is, you're not going to need S/4HANA for another 2, 3, 4 years. Why don't we take over, lift and shift ECC over, right? You can save some CapEx. We'll do it a lot more efficiently. As Rob Enslin from Google said, it'll be a cost issue, it'll be a security issue, it will be a scalability issue. We'll give you all three, right? Are you seeing a little more interest in freezing S4 moves and staying with ECC, but doing interesting things like that, or third-party maintenance? Or
Great question, Vinnie. So when we think about S4, and we have done exhaustive research within ASUG about how customers are thinking about S4. And one of the interesting, things that we saw in last year's state of the SAP community research is every single organization said, we will move to S4 at some point. Okay. In years prior, we had a number of them that said, never moving, not going to happen, won't do it. But this year, what we saw is that number went almost to zero of never going to move. Don't know when and don't know what the business case is, but I'm going to move. I don't think that's fundamentally changed. Every single organization will at some point move to S4, right? They will find some value in it. And I think Rob makes a great point. While you're waiting to find that value, because of what's happened inside your businesses, we can move you onto a cloud-based architecture, regardless of what you're running. If you want to run S4, you can run it in the cloud. You want to run ECC, you can run it in the cloud. And I think that gives customers a lot of value opportunity. I don't think it ultimately changes the trajectory that people will move to S4. And I think the big block, Vinnie, and this is where when you asked a question earlier about what could SAP do better, I'll tell you what SAP could do better and what the SIs could do better is make S4 implementations less costly to execute. Because the multipliers of what you spend for licensing to move S4 versus what you spend with an SI to help you make that move are material. And if we can help companies narrow that gap, I think that's a winning proposition. And I've talked to SAP about it, and I feel very strongly that we need to do a better job. And by saying that, I'm not saying that the SIs, all of a sudden need to be very different, but I think we have to be a lot more economical about what an S4 implementation requires. And in today's, COVID pandemic world, large-scale business process redesign that takes cross-functional teams and a lot of energy just is not going to happen if you don't have to start it. If you're in process, I understand. But if you're going to start it, you're probably unlikely to do so.
Talking about SIs, this would seem like a huge opportunity either for SAP or a couple of SIs to also move to a remote model, right? Remote configuration, remote monitoring. Are you seeing any shift in that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Go ahead.
David, lead us off.
No, we absolutely are. And a lot of good thinking there and a lot of, maybe long overdue thinking around how do I improve the engagement? And some of this, the catalyst is COVID-19, but understanding what's the value around my contribution from an IP and a project execution standpoint. And frankly, the value is not my T&E budget, right? It's how do I help people move forward? And so, I'm seeing a lot of good efforts and a lot of innovative thinking from partners in helping customers where they can do remote, not only from an execution or project standpoint, to your point, once we've gone onto a system, how do I help you manage that? I'm even talking to one partner that's they're coining one of their solutions is digital transformation as a service.
And Vinnie, I'm hearing a lot of success from customers and ASUG members who are doing these projects and finishing them off remotely, and they're seeing success. So one I'm aware of that went live on a hyperscaler on S4 over the US, July 4th weekend. I'm aware of another one that also was able to go live in Singapore in the middle of this pandemic, took advantage of some opportunities, had some people traveling and trying to get home, and was able to actually do something really interesting, is place some of their personnel in neighboring countries in Asia to be able to handle time zone differences, also interfacing with the project teams here in North America and getting it done. So I think there are a lot of really interesting and creative ways that organizations can get this work done if they need to.
Yeah, in fact, I've got another example, Vinnie. An SAP customer was in the middle of a SuccessFactors implementation when they had to shut down their office and send everyone home. So by necessity, they finished that one as a remote project and realized, hey, this actually works. And so they went ahead and continued forth with their S4 implementation remote based on the success they had that was forced upon them.
That's great to hear. My vision is once SIs become comfortable with that, the next logical step is move to shared services. You don't need to send a team to do data conversion to every site, right? You could have a shared data conversion factory, a testing factory, a training factory, and so on. And then once you do that, do a lot more automation. But one step at a time, I think we need to get them comfortable with the remote model.
I tell you, Vinnie, this is the same thing we're facing in our industry, right? Virtual, that genie's out of the bottle and it is not going back.
Yes.
So you're going to see these more in a hybrid world. So,
Vinnie, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Yep. And when we could travel, we would never have thought about these things. And now that we can't, things that we never thought possible are all of a sudden becoming doable, which is, pretty interesting. It's amazing to see this evolution or revolution we've gotten into with all the video that we're doing, the comfort, how quickly we've adapted to Teams and Zoom and, Google Hangouts and Meetups, all of those technologies and the ability for us to see each other face to face. I mean, that's come a long distance in a short period of time, and it's crushing through these barriers that we used to think were insurmountable. And I think that is really interesting.
Yep. Put on your economist hat, Geoff. Now that you've had a haircut finally.
Yes.
What do you see in terms of the economy recovering? And hold on. I want to ask you. I'm sure you talk to DSAG and you talk to your other peer groups around the world. What are you hearing in terms of, is it going to be a V recovery, sharp in some areas? Is it going to be U, gradual? Is it going to be W, kind of up and down based on flare-ups here or global inconsistencies? Or is it looking dead in L? You mentioned depression earlier. Hey, it's a scenario potential.
So let me give you that answer as the CEO of ASUG. So as a business leader, right, who runs a fairly, not a massive organization, but a sizable organization, right? Here in North America, we were hopeful that we would maybe be able to start in-person events, small events, chapter meetings, in some parts of the world, in some parts of North America later this year. Great example. We were hoping to maybe be in Florida in the fall of this year, right? When could we start, remote events where people would feel safe coming with safety protocols and all those things? Well, Vinnie, we've watched this country, over a period of time, and those have now become the farthest thing from my mind possible, that maybe the fall will turn into Q1 of next year, and Q1 might actually turn into Q2. So, when I think about our recovery from a CEO perspective, I think about that. This is clearly a W, but it might be a W that looks more like this, right? A double W, right? Until I think we get to a point where we can understand this virus, understand how it moves, understand what vaccines can make people safe, we won't have this solved. And I know that sounds like a fairly draconian thing, but I think, people coming together want to have a certain degree of feeling of safety. When we ask, and we use some great tools even to survey our own internal teams. We use Qualtrics, and we've been using Qualtrics quite a bit. We ask them, what would it take for you to think about wanting to come back to the office? And it's really two things. One, we happen to work a large part of our organizations in downtown Chicago. Most take public transportation to get to downtown. Well, public transportation has to be safe. Big hurdle, right? And I want to make sure that if I am going to be in downtown Chicago, I am going to take public transportation, that I don't contract the virus and bring it home to my family and my loved ones. And until we can solve some of those big issues, I think we will see ourselves staying in a remote environment and being able to work in this environment successfully. I happened to attend a meeting yesterday, one of the first times I've actually attended an in-person meeting outside of my home in about 2-3 months. It was great. I really did appreciate being in this facility. We practiced safety protocols. We had to deal with the idea of some people being on Zoom and some people being local. Right. So there's a lot of other adoption we're going to have to do when we start to bring people back together. Today, we work relatively binary. Everyone's on Zoom or Teams. Earlier, everyone was in the office, and now we're going to have to deal with an environment where we might have competing just as many people on Zoom as we have them in the office. Sure. And there's going to be another adoption curve we're going to have to do for that. But back to your original question, I think this is a multi-W recovery.
Well, it's better than an L, so.
It's much better than an L.
Yes. Any final thoughts, guys?
David.
It's really, ultimately, it's about, kind of following with Jeff's last comments, right? How do we learn to work in what's going to be this new hybrid world, right? There's always going to be a video component going forward for us in some way. There's going to be a remote component, right? Because really you have to be able to identify an environment where the attendees, the people that are participating in an event, are safe, that the content can be delivered in a safe manner, and frankly, one that I had not considered until this all came up, that the venue can support a safe environment around it. And so working towards that goal for socialization around these meetings is going to be key for us at ASUG. From a larger company standpoint, a larger organizational standpoint across our footprint with our members, the fact that we have, as an economy, been able to continue to move forward as successfully as we have, given all the disruption we've seen, that's back to your wow comment earlier, right? That's the biggest wow for me, is that we continue to move forward, that we continue to persevere, we find ways to get things done.
Dave, Geoff, lots of great examples. Thank you for your optimism.
Thank you, Vinnie.
And one of these days, come on down to Florida, and we'll
It'll be great to see you in person again, Vinnie. Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
We'll share the virus with you if you want.
Might take a pass on that one, but I do want to see you in person.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Vinnie.
Thank you.
Thank you.